It was a difficult decision, and who's to say it was the right decision or not to this point? It's interesting when looking back, and all. I was on a very privileged track at Pepsi.
Yeah.
All of my peers are CMOs, or CEOs, or heads of marketing for big organizations. My intern, the last intern I hired, is now the CMO of Pepsi. So as an the intern I hired right before that is now the CMO of Dick's Sporting Goods. My boss is the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. Another person who I was involved with, was running CMO of Netflix for a while, and like so it's all big jobs. It's kind of like you get to the certain point there, and your career is sealed, right? And so I decided to walk away from all of that and all that potential for a feeling, a dream, a desire to try to create my own path.
Welcome back to the Liquid Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Monte Barrow. I'm extremely excited today because I have a guest who's in the beverage industry, but not necessarily in the alcohol space. Now, you can argue that point because it's alcohol adjacent. It's the sister, the cousin, the uncle, but it is something that is very necessary. With me today, I have Mr. Karl Franz Williams with Uncle Waithley's Beverage Company. Karl, what's up, man?
What's going on?
I'm good. I'm good.
I would say we're probably more like the lover, you know
The
what I mean?
lover.
Like, yeah,
Okay.
the partner. Like you. I mean, if you're gonna have, if you got a bottle of vodka, rum, whatever, right? Like, it's got to pair up with somebody. It's got to hook up with somebody. You know what I mean? Like, yes, you can sip on its own, but a lot of times it's the pairing that matters, and that's where we come in, and we swing right in, and we're a bit promiscuous, right? We don't have to choose which one we want to be with. We get to sort of be, whoever we want. So that's the benefit of being a mixer.
Hey, lovers and friends. I like it. I like it. I like it. Well, Karl, look, I appreciate you spending some time with us today. We're going to talk a little bit about Uncle Waithley's. I'm definitely curious to learn a little bit more. Ironically, in some of my research, I think there's some connections that I even might have with some of the stories. So we'll get into all of that. You're probably like, what are
Okay.
you talking about? But we'll get into all of that. But look, hey, so look, let's start from the beginning.
Okay.
A couple of things. I know the folks listening and watching would love to know a little bit about you. Where are you from? Where you grow up? Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Brooklyn, and the funny thing is, so my family, my dad is from St. Vincent, the Grenadines, and he came over, was living in Indianapolis, and while he was working on his PhD, and he brought over, started bringing people from St. Vincent over there. So it was like this whole. So I was actually born in Indianapolis, Indiana, and there's this whole Caribbean, like, a large group of our family that was there, and then we started branching out from there. But we moved to New York when I was 6, and I grew up in Brooklyn, went to elementary school and high school. Started high school in Brooklyn, and then finished out in Hempstead, Long Island.
So I got to go back to the Indiana piece.
Yep.
And here's why. It's always amazing to me. I hear these stories about families who come from the islands in particular, and they go to cold places. What is that? What is that? What is that about? So let me give you a little history behind it. And I think this is the connection I was talking about. My wife's family is from Trinidad,
Okay.
right? Her grandmother actually, I believe, is from St. Vincent.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
I think her grandmother, and Lord, if my wife watches this, she's gonna kill me if I get this wrong. But
Oh.
I think she grew up on the island Beckway.
Yes. No, you got it
Yes.
right.
So that's where my wife's grandmother's family is from. They moved to Montreal. I'm like, you went from the heat to the cold. So you just told me, and like, is that what in the world is going on with that, man? What is that migration about?
Yeah, and it all comes down to where the first person or first group of people land, right?
Yeah.
Because when someone's over on the island and they're looking at, making that move, they're
Yeah.
sort of like, it's big places that everyone knows about: New York, LA, Miami, and then it's sort of like it's the US, right? So
Yeah.
so it's like, and it's wherever there's a group of other Caribbean people, where some other Caribbean people might be making a base. So Montreal has a large Caribbean community up there, Toronto as well. And so that you tend to see folks moving near each other, and the islands are different. All have like slightly different cultures, and
Yeah.
the way they talk, even if they're talking English, can be different. But there's still this sense of commonality, of connection, of shared experience. Like the foods are similar, the cultures are similar, even with the differences. There's just like so a Trini person, and you mentioned a Vincentian, different
Yeah.
islands, different twist on food, different aspects to the culture, but very connected, very understand each other. And there's something about that sort of island, that Caribbean experience, that is like that connects us all. That folks from the Caribbean. So like growing up in Brooklyn, a lot of the families and people that were around were Jamaican, and so I've always felt very connected to Jamaican culture. Trinidadian culture a little bit less so, but Jamaican culture was like very similar. There was a lot of very familiar, and ironically, my wife's her family's from Jamaica, so it's
Wow.
there is this sort of like common Caribbean thing, and you think Labor Day weekend, like the big parade in Brooklyn, like that's Caribbean people, right? And you're touching on all the English speaking, and then you get the French speaking and Spanish speaking, but there's still this connectedness that I think is pretty amazing. For actually being all these different countries, you know what I'm saying? So
Wow. So you said your dad came over to finish his PhD. Was that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
to do his PhD, yeah, he
To his
was.
PhD.
Actually, I think it may have started in college, but he ended up doing his PhD at Ball State University, which is in Indiana. So
So was there? I'm not sure. What was his area of focus? Out of curiosity.
education.
Okay. So was there any inkling for you to follow that type of path as well, as you were thinking, as you were coming up and thinking about, at some point I need to make these type of decisions as to what I'm going to do, education wise, and then from a career standpoint, where, and let me preface that I ask that because I know a lot of times, again, people like to follow in specific footsteps, and then Caribbean culture in particularly, a lot of times you'll see if one person is in one space, you'll see that a lot of times get trickled down, if you will. So I'm just curious, was that ever any of your aspirations?
Yeah, I mean, so not exactly. So I never envisioned myself being an educator.
Uh-huh.
And and actually both of my parents were. My mother was a teacher
Yeah.
for a period of time. We were homeschooled until first grade, so there was definitely this culture of and if you think about sort of what I did later on, like going to Yale, like there was this education and learning, and I still go to my parents' house and there's like 2 rows of encyclopedias, like they were just
Wow.
always big on education and learning, and that hasn't that was so that has impacted me in that way. But I think a greater impact to me from my dad. My mom ended up moving into nursing, and then she was a nurse until she retired. But my dad, he so he was the principal of my elementary school, which
Wow.
that sucked.
Gift and a curse.
That sucked. That was not great. But
Yeah.
he ended up going to work for the Board of Ed in an administrative position, and so he was working there for a while. But my dad is a man of ideas. Like he's always had like tons and tons of ideas and things that he wanted to do. He's written a couple books. He's like, he's got all these entrepreneurial things. And so he actually decided that he was going to leave education and go back to St. Vincent to build a business, and travel back and forth because we were still in New York. And so what I would say that probably the biggest thing that I got from my dad is that entrepreneurial drive. Like so he went to St. Vincent to start this business when I was a senior in high school, about to go to college. And so actually it may have been like he was working on it while I was a senior, but he actually moved out my freshman year of college. And it was one of those things where like I saw that, and I mean I feel like I kind of always had this like little bit of an entrepreneurial hustler kind of thing, and even though I didn't see my dad necessarily becoming an entrepreneur until that point, the fact that he was, I like the spirit was always there, and so in high school, like I was doing like selling Cutco knives and doing other types of things. I always had like this entrepreneurial sort of thing, and I think I got it from my dad.
So a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit came from some of your dad, some of the stuff that your dad did when he went back to St. Vincent. It sounds like. Let's not gloss over the Yale piece though. So you went to Yale. Mm-hmm. What did you major in?
Electrical engineering. So, but I think one of the things, sometimes people ask me, would you do engineering again if you were to do it over? The answer is no. I think one of the great things about being at an institution like Yale, liberal arts institution, is are the people you meet with all, like the exposure to different, all like lots of different and interesting things. And when engineering tends to be somewhat of a separate kind of thing, like there's a whole engineering and science area but whereas a lot of what, I'm going back, like this is a long time ago when I was in college. I don't know how that's evolved and but the thing that I found was that, when most of my friends were writing papers and coming together around that, I was, an engineering program was a lot smaller. When you think about some of the other departments and things like that, I was off working on problem sets, and I think I may have wrote like just 2 or 3 papers my entire college career, right?
Wow.
Whereas, most people written hundreds, right? And so, you did feel like there was almost this thing of like there was my social life and when I was around my friends, and then there was when I was in class and sort of going and doing things, and they were almost like 2 separate kind of lives that I had going on here. But it was driven by this idea that, I joke. I was like, I never want to wear a suit to work, right? So right. If I'm an engineer, building stuff, I'm not going to be in a suit and tie and whatever. And I had this idea that I was like, I'm going to build something. I'm going to have an idea. I'm going to create something. And then, when I graduate from college, when I finish, I'm going to go figure out how to bring that to market, and that's gonna be my thing. Like, and then I never have to really work for anybody. I get to be this entrepreneur, and and so, but it wasn't, like I said, being an engineer here and feeling separate from my friends and all that, it wasn't the easiest thing, and ultimately. Like I said, if I was to go back and do college again, I might have chosen a different track. I did use my degree for, or aspects of my degree for a hot minute. I started my career working for Procter & Gamble in manufacturing.
Okay.
And so Procter hires engineers to come in, to manage areas of their plants. So it was sort of this hybrid where that background in math and science and technology was really drove a lot of what I did in that first role. But even then, I was eager to get back to the business side of things, right? So I ended up starting at Procter in manufacturing and then moving into brand management with them.
So brand management, and I get the sense that a lot of your experience fell into that space, the brand management space, from that point forward. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, so I was at Procter for a couple years in brand, and then I went to work for Pepsi in marketing. So they call their track marketing. Procter's called brand, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you have some experience in brand management, brand marketing with some big companies, P&G, Pepsi. I also understand that you became a restaurateur and a mixologist. I'm still trying to connect the dots, man. So are these passion projects?
Yeah.
Or was it opportunity or a little bit of both? Tell me a little bit about that. And again, because I'm starting to connect the dots. We got Uncle Waithley, Ginger Bee over here, and I see the climb starting to happen. Connect the dots for me.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was, in college, I'm an alpha, and I was my fraternity's social chair. I did our events, and I came up with these creative ideas of doing things. So there was always this sort of like, I mean, I guess my earliest sort of connection to hospitality came in the sense of putting on these events, right, for my fraternity, and then but my first true entrepreneurial venture was as I started like a model management company where I was like, there's no agency sort of managing that's focused on black men and our men of color. And I felt like I could create something that would do that. So it was called the Model Image, or TMI, and and then we would, so that was sort of my first entrepreneur. And I started with, I had started dabbling in modeling, and I had found I was working at a gym in Hempstead, and there was a guy there who was like, yo, like, we started a conversation. Turned out he went to Yale. Turned out he was, we ended up having a great conversation. And he was like, yo, like, what are you working on? I told him about that. He was like, I love the idea. I want to help you with that. And so he and I became partners in starting this agency, or this model management company. And so I'm leaving college. I'm like, okay, I don't have this product that I'm going to go make into a business with Procter. Right. But my side thing was, I was living in New Jersey at the time. My side thing was coming into New York City and working with these models, and trying to build that company. That was difficult. That commute, that back and forth. I had to be in the plant super early in the morning. The whole fashion world was usually late in the evenings. Right. And when I made the transition to brand, I moved to Puerto Rico and basically kind of let that go, right? But that was sort of my first sort of entrepreneurial thing, so that entrepreneurial thing was just biting me. It was just like, I love that part of it, and so the connection there is one of the things that we didn't have an office. So we would meet at coffee shops in New York City. A lot of times it was the Starbucks on Astoria, and so we'd meet at these coffee shops. Got to Puerto Rico, so I fell in love with coffee shops. Got to Puerto Rico, there were none. Right. I was like, wow, like that's an opportunity. Here I am. I want to be an entrepreneur. Maybe I'll open a coffee shop here, like the ones that I was hanging out in New York. I started working on a business plan. So the other through line in my career has been beverage. So when I was at Procter in manufacturing, I was working on Sunny Delight and Hawaiian Punch. So that was what we were making in the plant. When I moved to brand and moved to Puerto Rico, I was working on brand Sunny Delight for Latin America and Puerto Rico. And then I moved over to Gain laundry detergent, which is why I was like, maybe this is not fun anymore. I want to get. And so I left Procter and came to Pepsi, and that business plan that I had for opening a coffee shop in Puerto Rico I ended up, shelving it, coming back to New York, moving to Harlem, and going to work for Pepsi. And it was when I got to Harlem that I realized that the same issue was there. There wasn't a coffee shop like what I imagined or what I loved in Harlem. So a few years into working at Pepsi, I decided to open one. And that was my side hustle. So I had a coffee shop. It was called Society Coffee. And at the time, I didn't know that I was going to be, I wasn't thinking that I was becoming a hospitality entrepreneur or a mixologist or a bartender. I just was opening a coffee shop because I wanted something like that in my neighborhood. And I thought it would be a great entrepreneurial venture.
So the entrepreneurial bug bit you hard. You explored that. You explored that that bite, for lack of a better word. At what point did you say, you know what? Because I heard you say it was a side hustle. At what point did you say, you know what? I'm tired of the side. Let me look at doing something in this space full term.
Yeah. So, obviously my managers at Pepsi knew that I had this business that I was running on the side. And so, they were kind of like, I was moving up in the company, and they were trying to figure out like what would be the right sort of track for me, up through marketing, and so the idea was maybe innovation could be interesting. It's still on the brand track, and you're out here. We can use that entrepreneurial spirit inside Pepsi, and so I started working on this project to come up with the next great Pepsi product, and just thinking out of the box. I had a little satellite office down in the village. I was working with creatives, and I started working with mixologists. And I was blown away by the craft of what they were doing. And it was very early in the movement, and everyone was really focused on taking this thing that alcohol, which to me to that point was just about getting lit. And they're like, there's this whole culinary experience that can happen around the bottle, and around what you do and the cocktails that they were creating. And I was really blown away by it. And then Pepsi kind of made a pivot. They were like, you know what? We've decided that this far out innovation is not what we're interested in doing. We want to sort of bring it back close in. We want you to focus on working on big brand stuff. Still innovation, but big brand stuff. And I was working on the Amp Energy shot, but I was now uninspired. Like that had been like, I loved that, like working with the creatives and being in the city and building something from scratch and all that. And, still had this coffee shop, still trying to figure out. So it was at that point where the golden handcuffs were being offered. Like, you're going to get your first executive promotion, so you now become an officer in the company, and blah blah blah, and you need to figure out what you're doing, right? Like, are you going to do this? Because I don't know if you're going to be able to run that coffee shop and do all this at the same time and everything else. I was walking through Harlem and saw a retail condo for sale, and I was like, I could buy that, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. And I just had a moment where I was like, you know what? Maybe I could put a bar here, a mixology bar here, and maybe I just go do this for a while. I'm young. I didn't go to business school. Most of my peers had done the business school route, so they were all a little bit older than me. And I was like, I'm young. I'm doing well in my career. Maybe it's time to try this direction, to go try to do some of this stuff and see where that leads me. And so I made it was a difficult decision. And who's to say it was the right decision or not to this point? It's interesting when I, looking back, and all, I was on a very privileged track, at Pepsi. All of my peers are CMOs or CEOs or heads of marketing for big organizations. My intern, the last intern I hired, is now the CMO of Pepsi. So the intern I hired right before that is now the CMO of Dick's Sporting Goods. My boss is the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods. Another person who I was involved with was running CMO of Netflix for a while, and so it's all big jobs. It's kind of like you get to the certain point there and your career is sealed, right? And so I decided to walk away from all of that and all that potential for a feeling, a dream, a desire to try to create my own path. Yeah, I mean that's what led me into opening a mixology bar in 67 Orange Street.
So I'm curious to see, especially those who are listening as well. I'm sure they're curious. What was your family thinking when you told them that, hey, I'm about to walk away from this to go on and follow this dream? How
Yeah.
was it? Were they supportive? Were they like, what in the world?
It was a mixed bag, you know. My parents are very religious. They don't drink. I've never drunk that I know of, not in my lifetime at least. And the idea that I was opening a bar was concerning, right? They're like, why does it have to be a bar? Um, they understood the entrepreneurial thing. I mean, obviously, my dad was an entrepreneur, and my mom, loved my dad, so she had an understanding of kind of how these things work. But I think they were sort of like, yeah, like worried about the choice and, concerned about what my future was going to look like and whether I was making the right choice or not. Um, and what complicated that, to be honest, was the fact that so I left in April of 2008, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna,
Ooh, 2008.
yeah. But what happened 2008, Great
Yeah,
Recession,
right, right.
and so my plans quickly sort of, started imploding in the sense that I now have this bar. We opened in December of 2008, and I now have this bar, and development has stopped in Harlem. Traffic isn't there. The vision that I had for how this thing was going to sort of launch was quickly like, like that's not going to happen. Like this is like, and it was a struggling business for a while there. Like it was just like trying to get it going at a time where there was no access to capital, where the market itself was super slow, the people they weren't doing more building in Harlem. No one was moving up into the area that, all the plans, all the building that I expect. We were under scaffolding for almost 3 years. It was a really, really challenging start. But the interesting thing, or the silver lining to that, is that's what led me from being just a business owner to actually being a mixologist, and to really getting into the craft. Because prior to that, like, I did this as a business concept is what I was thinking. But when at that moment, I was really like, people don't really understand what we're doing. We're up here doing cocktails. At the time, there were no cocktail bars north of like 14th Street. It was a very new industry in and of itself. And here I am, almost 100 blocks away, making these cocktails and things like that. And so education, kind of dialing back to that, became a big part of what we were doing. And we started doing these tastings and experiences that we would bring bartenders and liquor companies and brand ambassadors and stuff in to talk about the products, talk about cocktailing. And as I was teaching my universe, my world, the community around 67 Orange, I was also learning myself. And I realized that the success of 67 Orange Street ultimately was hinged on how on the connection to me and what I was doing, being more than just an owner, a guy who has opened this thing, but being the lifeblood, the executive chef, the mastermind behind the experience, right? And so in order to get there, I had to learn a ton. And that's really, I think, that was an important decision, a decision that has been a large part of the success that I've had to this point, and being able to develop, curate, and keep a product across every bar that I've opened that's been at that sort of high level. But it was also, again, it was a complex choice because I basically made a decision to start my career all the way over.
Yeah.
Right? Like people work as barbacks and then they apprentice at a bar and they spend years learning And here I was essentially doing the same in my own bar and at other places and things like that. But, I already had a career when you think about it, but I'm literally learning from the beginning, learning a trade from the bottom and working my way up, in terms of learning and stuff like that. So, I spend a lot of, these days when I kind of reflect on the last sort of 14, 15, coming up on 15 years of like what I've done and like those are choices that I made that were complex choices, and I did them because of a drive and a vision, and a passion and a desire to create my world. But there were certainly lessons that I've learned from that I think I wouldn't discourage my son. I have two boys if they decide to do the same. But I think there's certain things that I would tell them about making these choices. Yeah. Exactly.
So there was an inflection point early on, manufacturing to branding, an inflection point, big business, if you will, to independent hospitality and mixology.
Yep.
Tell me about now this inflection point from mixologist to what we do now in the space with this brand that you've created and founded, Uncle Waithley.
Yeah. So, one of the lessons, right? And you talked about the pivot. Like I've done small business, right? Like I understand it. I understand the mentality of it. Understand, and so particularly for people of color, oftentimes the businesses we start are small businesses because we lack the resources to do bigger business and to make to create. And it's what we're exposed to. It's what we have. It's what we know about, right? Like, I forget the percentage, but a large percentage of Black-owned businesses are in the service industry. So bars, restaurants, dry cleaners, lawyers, doctors, things like that, and very little outside of that. But the reality is that when you think about scale, and when you think about businesses that are truly scalable, that can become sort of these that where massive wealth is created, it's oftentimes not in those spaces, right? It's not, it is, and it was something that I spent years focused on the craft of what I was trying to do, on this mission to make this thing happen. And during that time, to be frank, I was more concerned about surviving, about learning, about or maybe even proving that I could do this, that I could make this happen, and less about thinking about sort of that bigger picture of what does scale look like, right? Like how do you build something that is more than just iconic. 67 Orange Street at this point is iconic. The reputation I've created in the industry is incredible, but there's a lack of monetization there, right? Like the money's doesn't necessarily follow that. I remember when Jim Meehan, who's a friend of mine, he's created or founded PDT, and I remember when he was leaving PDT and we were talking, and he said, "Yeah, man, like opening a bar, running a bar doesn't make you wealthy." You know what I'm saying? He's like, "This is great, and I've won every award. My reputation is incredible, and I'm not rich, So, but there's, amongst a lot of us, there's this passion for the craft and all that, but there was this love for the craft. But at the end of the day, I realized that, being able to build for scale and understanding what a scalable business is and how that works was important, and then I had the skills through learning business on the streets, right? Like really getting my hands dirty as a small business owner and doing things that I would never had to do or learn had I stayed in big business. There's things that I know how to do that someone in that spirit will never learn because they don't have to, right? There's a grittiness and that comes from that. But on the other side of it, I had that big business experience as well. And then there was this through line of beverage all the way through, right? So from manufacturing to marketing and to organization, it's always been beverage, and then mixology, right? And so I was during the pandemic, is where this all really came to a head because we had just closed Solomon and Cuff, which was our largest, probably my most ambitious endeavor, 5,000 square foot rum bar, and it was like I wanted to create this true temple to elevated Caribbean culture and to rum. And it was this really sort of aspirational goal that I had, but ultimately, the location just didn't work, and we ended up closing that. So that was an emotional and financial blow. But so that had just happened at the end of 2019. We're now at the beginning of 2020. I had two other bars, Anchor and 67 Orange, and I'm thinking about. And I have plans on what I want to do there, and then the pandemic hits, right? So I just started like shaking off. I was still sort of working through the challenges that had been created because of closing something that massive, and all that went into that. I was just and then the pandemic hits, and I'm like, I don't know if this bar thing, this restaurant thing has any, I think maybe I've sort of reached the point where this is it, I don't know what's going to happen next. I certainly know that the idea that this global pandemic could take away or destroy the possibility for that is a scary place to be. And I have young kids, I had a 5-year-old and a 10-month-old. And so your perspective sort of changes thinking about
Absolutely.
about what you're doing and how that all works. And so I decided to so I'm thinking about that, and we had an alcohol to go program. So the idea for Uncle Waithley's, it actually started as at Solomon and Cuff. I wanted the best ginger beer, right? I wanted a ginger beer that because of my program, like I said, I was putting this rum program that I wanted to be the rum program across the country. Like we were going to be this world-class rum program, right? And so I'm looking at how some of the ginger beers that were on the market mixed, and I felt like there was an opportunity there. Maybe the ginger didn't stand up, within the drink, in the way that I thought it should, or like. It just the flavors didn't meld with the flavors in the alcohol. There was like this. There's a grassiness. There's an earthiness that comes with roots and so with some of the spirits, it just didn't. It wasn't. There was almost like a clashing thing that was happening for me, and with some of the ginger beers on the market and making these rum drinks, and so I thought I could improve on that. But I was also looking for this sort of flavor, this classic sort of like we made ginger beer at home growing up, and that wasn't there. And when I looked at the other Caribbean ginger beers, so I was looking for that sort of taste profile, that sort of real ginger forward with a bite kind of flavor that I knew. And then the third thing was that when I would go into sort of Caribbean markets and look at the products in the market, everything was like bright, fake, lots of sugar.
Right.
And I was just like, man, like we can do better. I can do better, right? And so got with my team of bartenders, and we started working, and we came with an early version of Uncle Waithley's. And so we were just serving at Solomon and Cuff. So now so fast forward 4 years later to 2019, Solomon and Cuff is closed. We're in the pandemic. I'm looking at what to serve for this alcohol to go program, and people are like, yeah, the alcohol is good, but I actually wouldn't mind something healthy right now. It's a freaking pandemic, right? Like give me something,
Right.
And so I brought the ginger beer in, and we started serving the ginger beer, sometimes with alcohol, sometimes not, and it was a hit. Like people loved it, and I was like, you know what, it was a hit at Solomon and Cuff. People are loving it now in this sort of alcohol to go format, and buying it both hard or soft, right, with alcohol or without.
Yeah.
I was like, and a friend of mine was like, Karl, why haven't you tried to take this to market yet? And I was like, you know what, you're right. This is a moment here because I don't know what's going to happen, the future of my bars. I don't know. I've been at this for a while, this career of building bars, and I can't say it's been this sort of like it's been, I feel like I've had a huge impact on culture, on the culture of Harlem, and on the spirits and mixology world overall. But there's not like there's the financial success that's followed that. So I need to start, so maybe there is something there. And so I started the process of commercializing it, sort of late 2020. I started working on it and got with my chef, and he and I worked together to perfect the formula. I had the branding and marketing experience, so I started working on the brand and what it stood for. I was talking to my cousin, and I was like, I want to connect this to us, to our culture, to St. Vincent and all that. And he and I were just riffing on the idea of what that would look like. In St. Vincent, sometimes, I mean, it's cross out, you say someone older, you call them uncle, right? And so it was like, grandpa, what if we put you know what I mean? Grandpa was a ginger farmer. Like, he was passionate about health. He lived to be 100 years old. Like,
Wow.
like that story. And I was just like, this is Uncle Waithley's. This is like, irony is my father's also, his first name is actually Waithley as well. So that's where, it really became this full circle moment for me, where my entire life, my entire experience, work experience to that point was coming together, was culminating in this product. And on top of that, I got to pay homage to my family and culture. And so it really became this, like I said, full circle, this incredible moment. And that's also why the product is so meaningful to me now. It's just like, this is like a life's work kind of coming together. And so that's how Uncle Waithley's came about.
I love to see and hear the passion, man. Let me say this though. I heard you say it's paying homage to your grandfather. It was your grandfather, homage to your and he lived to be 100.
Yep.
My wife's grandmother is from St. Vincent as well. She passed about 2 years ago. She was 110. So it is something in the water. It is something in the water over there. So I don't know if that ginger is connected to that, but Lord have mercy, man. That's insane.
So it's funny that you say the water. One of the things that so we have this, and I think other islands have this as well. And like this, the fountain of youth, right? Like there's some natural spring that people believe has attributes that can give you long life, and so. There's in St. Vincent we have one of those, we call it the spa water, and you can go and just sort of grab yourself and so I was like, when I was thinking about building this, I wanted it to be carbonated, I wanted it to be sparkling, and I started thinking about the spa water, so I had my father ship me a few bottles of spa water, and I made it with the spa water, and the taste was just so much better. And I started thinking about what that meant, right? And so mineral water is ultimately about the naturally occurring salts that are in the water. So what I figured out was that if I could create a mineral water, using organic salts, that I could essentially, what does salt do in food? It enhances all the flavors. It brings everything alive, even more so, right? And so that's what we're doing with Uncle Waithley. So when I talk about why is it such an incredible drink on its own, because all the flavors are there. You get everything that's there. You get the ginger, turmeric, lime, Scotch bonnet. It's all brought out, because of the use of the mineral water, because of the balance that we created, because of how we prepare the ginger. But it also means that in a cocktail, it doesn't get lost either. And those components that you want stand up, and they mix really well, and they play nice too. It's not like you lose the alcohol or the spirit in the drink. It just gets enhanced. You know what I mean?
Compliments.
Compliments. Yep, exactly.
So I know you're a brand guy, and in that brand space, we always talk about unique differentiators. What unique value does my product bring versus another? And I heard you talk about the spring water, but what else is unique about Uncle Waithley's ginger beer that you might not find in other ginger beers?
Well, the most sort of unique thing is the use of Scotch bonnet pepper, and so we are the only beverage, not just ginger beer, but the only beverage on the market that has Scotch bonnet in it, which I think is somewhat surprising. I mean, in the sense that Scotch bonnet is used ubiquitously in Caribbean cooking.
Right.
All the islands in some way are using Scotch bonnet or similar pepper in their cooking, in Africa as well. And so the thing but we're the only person using it in beverage, and the reason we used it, right? So like one of the things, like your palate has a hard time differentiating between the heat of a pepper or heat of ginger, right? It's just sort of just heat on the palate, and so we're not the first ginger beer to use pepper as a way of increasing and lengthening that bite that you want from the ginger. And so the process of making a ginger beer, you can lose some of the ginger bite through that process. You're adding water and all these other, and processing it and carbonating and all that. And some of the bite can get lost in that. But by adding pepper, you hold on to that and you lengthen it, right? And so, so we get that benefit, but we also get, and I think this is what is super cool, like Scotch bonnet is not just about heat and bite, it's also about flavor. So it's going into food. It's the reason it's used so much is because it adds this flavor to food that is amazing, and so it's a flavor. So when people taste our ginger beer, they're like, this is definitely Caribbean, and I don't even know why, right? Like if you don't tell them there's Scotch bonnet in there, they're like, this is Caribbean. I just know, like, and it's because this flavor that's there, this undertone, this note that gets added to it, and so it is something that sets our ginger beer apart. It makes it, between that and the use of the mineral water, between the fresh ingredients, like everything's fresh. We're not using any extracts or anything like that. We're literally bringing in ginger, turmeric, crushing them, and we're using fresh lime juice. Like it's like it's just this it's this great product that at the end of the day, once you add the Scotch bonnet, and once you use the use of the mineral water, it really just makes for an incredible drink.
Yeah, I know it's a lot easier sometimes to dumb down products. Sometimes it's a lot cheaper as well to just put something with a lot of preservatives and things of that nature. So for those who are listening to this, they may be thinking, okay, Karl has all these different pivots. He has to be sitting on a stack of endless supply of money to start businesses like that. And you and I know that it's not easy and it's not cheap to do some of these businesses, right? So how did you go about funding, and what has been some of the ups and downs in trying to fund a business like this?
Yeah, well, the reality is that that the pivots, like leaving big business to go become a small business owner meant that I was leaving, large wealth to sort of like claw and scratch and fight my way to to surviving, right? Not even just to wealth.
Right.
So no, I didn't have a big nest egg to fall back on or lots of money to be able to go out and make things happen. But it's one of the benefits of being a small business owner who had survived the Great Recession and who also survived the pandemic. I had developed, and my team, I have an amazing team, some great people that I work with, who help me run the bars, and a couple of whom are on the team. Monica Freeman Green, who's worked with me with my bars, and Michael McConnell, he worked with me on Solomon and Cuff. Like, we just have a grittiness, like a hustle. Like we figure out how to do things, and we don't let having the money to do them get in the way. Like we learn how to work our way around and find ways to get things done. And that's a lot of it. Like, I had a conversation with a potential investor, an investment fund, and he was like, he started asking me about how much revenue we had to this point, and he was like, wow, when I look at your brand, when I look at all that you have out there, the website, the the packaging, the concept, the articles that are out there, there's a sophistication that your brand has that I rarely see, that I just don't see in brands that are not much bigger. Right. People often ask, like, how did you do that? How did you make these things happen? And it's really that. It's that grit. It's that understanding how to do things you know, and there's some, like I don't have to hire a product development person to figure out, how to create the flavor profile. Like I have that skill, and that's a huge part of it. I don't have to hire a branding agency. I can work with creatives and figure out how to pull that together. So packaging and branding, like there's always continuous improvement, and as we scale as a company, like I want to bring other smart people into that process. As we look at the brand, like we're gonna like the bigger concept for what we're doing is sort of mixologist crafted Caribbean flavors. And so you're going to see other things along that sort of through line. Uncle Waithley's Vincy Brew, which is our ginger beer, is our first product. The next thing you'll see from us are flavors on that Scotch bonnet ginger, that ginger Scotch bonnet base. You're going to see us adding flavors on that that make sense, Caribbean flavors. And so that's going to be, we hope to have some line extensions in the market early 24. But yeah, I mean, so it's like there's a part of there are some things that just the skills that I've earned through blood, sweat, and tears over the years that that play out really well here, that allow us to do some things that cost a lot of money for other companies to do. And then there's just this grit. But at the end of the day, beverage is a very expensive business, particularly when you're talking about non-alc. And there's, case size is the same. We're still talking about a 24-pack case as you are in alc, right? But the margins are smaller. The amount that you can sell a case for is substantially smaller. It's very close to beer. I mean, beer and non-alc or soda, they're very similar in terms of margins and so it's really about volume and scale. Right? You can't be in this business or make money in this business unless you can create scale, and creating scale costs money. I mean, large format grocery. It's a sexy place. Is where a brand that's truly scalable has to be able to go. You can create some momentum by being on premise, and you create affinity by being on premise in bars and restaurants, and that's very important to us. That's kind of like our heart, right? Like that's where but like the opportunity to be in grocery is really where the scale happens. That takes us to to where we want to get to as a company, and makes us venture backable, makes us ready to sort of really grow. But that business is it requires working through third parties, whether it's distributors, co-packers, etc. It requires being able to be consistent in your delivery, to be able to scale up, to be able to support that business in store. So just getting into the grocery store is not enough. You have merchandising support. You have to think about pricing and promos, sampling. There's not a lot of money dollars at a startup like ours for marketing, right? Like we're not running TV ads. We don't have radio. We're not, there's not big billboards anywhere. We don't have street teams painting a city, with Uncle Waithley's signage and wild postings and things like that. You can't do that, unless you're Pepsi launching a new brand, right? Like, for a startup like us, we can't come in and make that kind of splash on a launch. So it's really about these sort of more guerrilla marketing tactics, right? So sampling and getting people to try the product but sampling is very expensive, right? Like you got to pay someone to be there to serve the product, and then you're only reaching a few hundred people at best every time you do it, right? So there's this reach, like you have you think about the marketing funnel, you're able to reach. Like there's awareness, there's reach, right? There's trial, and the dope thing about it is you're getting trial, you're getting people to try the product, which is like jumps a bunch of steps in the marketing process, but your reach is really small, and so you've got to do it a lot, which becomes very expensive, right? So this is a business that is really about scale and dollars, and so while we've had some great traction in terms of, I like to think of what we've done to this part about about structuring and building, setting up our business fundamentals. So we've worked on the unit economics of our product. We figured out how to get the cost down to a reasonable cost so that there was a margin. Like in beverage, you want to, like, your minimum margin would be about 30%. Ideally, your 40, 50, 60% margin and gross margin, and that is sort of that takes some work. But that's the only way you're going to, because you have to be able to have that margin to work with and to be able to scale. So starting there, like, just working on our unit economics. We had to work through finding the right co-pack relationship. We had to optimize our process, because you're scaling up a process that, we're not just working in our. We started out making the product in the kitchen at one of my bars, the Anchor Spa in Connecticut, right? And then we went from making it there to our first co-pack situation, which was helped us learn and grow, but ultimately couldn't scale with us into this situation. So there's figuring out manufacturing and setting up our systems for inventory, for financial management, all of that, and then really learning creating a model so that as we sort of think about our business in these sort of concentric circles around a core, when we scale up from there, we now have a model that we can take. So we're in about 80 large format grocery stores. We're in 56 Whole Foods and 22 Market District stores, and in those stores we're using a model, and that model this is something that we've learned and developed, and we continue to modify. But as that, we can now take that model. So when we jump from 80 to 500 or 1,000 stores, we know what to do to make sure that the product is moving in those stores. You don't get 15 chances here, right? Like, you get into a major chain in large format, you have to be ready. The product has to be ready to move. You got to be ready to do the right things to make it move. And if you're not, you can't come back a year later and say, okay, guys, no. I know it didn't sell the first time, but
give me another try.
Give me another chance.
Right.
It's not going to happen. And so we feel very good about the model that we've developed. And now we're at a point where we've put a lot of work in and we're ready to scale. And so with that comes raising the money. We have a campaign on Start Engine. So we started with a crowdfunding effort to see what we could drive there. And then we're also, we'll come out of that and then look at some angels and institutions that first focus on super early stage, so that we can have a real war chest to be able to get out there and scale this business and recognize the potential that we have.
I love the hustle, and I see the success bubbling. I mean, kudos to you and your team, man. Look, before we get out of here, I have to ask the $1 million question, and this is what everybody wants to know, and this is the curveball. Who are your top five?
Top five.
And you know what I'm talking about when I say top five. I shouldn't have to explain that to you. Music, hip hop.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, I mean, where are you from?
So I'm from Baltimore, originally from Baltimore.
Okay. So I mean, I said I'm from Brooklyn. So you already know that.
I know.
My top two are going to be in this order: Biggie and Jay-Z.
Okay.
Like that's
no surprise there.
But you know what? In my top five, and I got a little bit of an eclectic taste. You know what I'm going to throw in there? I love the Roots. I love the musicality that they put
One of my
there.
favorites.
And I think Black Thought is just under under praise. Like, that dude is just like an incredible lyricist and storyteller, and you don't hear that talked about enough. And then with Questlove and just the musicality there. Quest comes from a whole family of musicians as well, I believe, and there's just something about that. So the Roots. Curveball that I'm throwing in there is Lenny Kravitz.
Okay.
And it's different, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm not mad at you.
that there's just, and then what he does with music, and then and then my fifth is as I look at this man's longevity, the way he's impacted, um, you know, um, Caribbean music, his story, and his passion. But Buju Banton, that gravelly voice, and so when I was in high school and we were grinding in basements to dance hall, that was when Buju was really breaking out. I got a chance to see him perform at a small concert in college, and then. So he's always been one of those. So those are my top five. Now, there's a lot of amazing artists who I didn't even touch on, but that's my top five right there, man.
That's that's a dope top five, and I see your top five in your business route. I can see I can see some correlations to even the folks from business minded to connected to culture to the eclectic piece. I actually see that in your business transformations, if you will. So not surprising, not surprising. So there's one final question I do want to ask you. So I typically do this game, and I'm gonna give you the pare down. I'm gonna ask you the one of the questions. So I typically do this game. Here's one of my favorites, and it's just to give some insights about the person we're speaking to. And I'm going to just ask you the one piece. So here's one of my favorites: qualities about myself. What is one of your favorite qualities about you, Carl?
About Carl, I could get into sort of, I think I'm not afraid to look at myself, and to look at myself, try to look at myself honestly, like that I think is a big part. But ultimately, I would say one of the greatest qualities that I have is that I'm not a quitter. You know what I mean? Like hey, you can argue there may have been times I probably should have quit and didn't, right? But I'm like, you're gonna have to put me under the ring if you want me to stop, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't quit. I don't know. I don't believe in giving up. Like, I'm a fighter, and that's
Love it.
probably the
Love it.
strongest quality I think.
Love it. Love it. Carl, thank you so much for spending time with us. I think the people have I mean, goodness, this was almost a master class on the journey, right? It's people who are wondering, should I be doing this? Can I do this? Hey, I'm here, but I want to be here. Is that pivot something that is even possible? There's people that have done it. So thank you for sharing your story with the entrepreneurs and the people who want to be entrepreneurs and people who are just interested in learning a little bit more about the business. And Uncle Waithley's. Look, guys, I say this all the time. It's great to vote with likes, but vote with your dollars. Go out and buy and support these brands. They are some of the best brands you can find. Where can they find you? Where can they find you? The websites, social handles. Share all
Yeah.
that information with
So,
us.
Uncle Waithley's, so IG, Uncle Waithley's website, Uncle Waithley's, so with an S on the end. The You can find us if you're in the Northeast region, so the tri-state area. We're in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all the Whole Foods. You can find us in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Market District stores there. We're on Amazon, so if you're not in one of the areas I just mentioned, you can find us on Amazon. We're on Boyson, and we're also in Boyson stores in New York and California. And then we're currently in a bunch of bars and restaurants in the New York City area. So you can always ask your bartender if they have it. If they don't, tell them they need to get it. Tell them to reach out. Hit that UncleWaithley's.com or Uncle Waithley's on IG, Uncle Waithley's on TikTok. Find us and get yourself some Uncle Waithley's.
I'm a ginger beer fanatic and a pepper sauce and hot pepper fanatic, so I will be buying some. Carl, thank you so much. Appreciate you, my friend. You are truly a liquid entrepreneur, and look, to your success. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers. Cheers.